Hi, YouTube.
It's Christian.
And it's Crystal. And we're back again with another video. And this time we're going to get very candid about the word divorce. Yeah, that's a scary word, right? So, it's just a blessing to be here tonight. We had a long day. We did church today, right? And my husband barbecued and we just put the kids down. So it's late. So we're not going to be long, but just really quick. And we just want to share our thoughts about, why, you should not play around with the word divorce. And just to, be just very candid and honest with you guys. We've just come out of our own little struggle this weekend. Coming out of our own little struggle this weekend of, disagreements, or sometimes you can feel like the enemy is attacking, your marriage or yourself personally. And in life and marriage, sometimes things get tough. But in the tough roads or the tough moments or the bumps or, my husband always say, the ebbs and flows of things, right? And in those things, it's just some things that you should not do and you should not say. And if you are saying them, or if you have said them, just giving you a little advice about what you should do, and warning signs against, some of the pitfalls we have fell into. Do you want to say anything before we dive right in, or? Not really.
No. No.
Well, also too, I want to encourage you guys to look into getting this book, Maximize Your Marriage. We had the pleasure of visiting a church in Norfolk, Virginia when our son was one. Well, before our son was one, we moved to Virginia and we found CRC as our church home. And what was the pastor? Pastor Macbeth and his wife wrote this book, Maximizing Your Marriage. And this has been really edifying to me and my husband's journey in marriage. And they have actually a chapter 2, called Remove the Word Divorce from Your Vocabulary. And this was really edifying for me. So I'll just have my husband read. Maybe, he's a fast reader, he's a lawyer, so he can read really quickly. So I'll have him read just the first paragraph to maybe introduce you into some of their words of wisdom about removing the word divorce out of your vocabulary.
Okay.
He's like, I wasn't ready for this. She put me on the spotlight.
If God is at work in our lives and he hates divorce, why should we ever use the word? Actually, divorce comes from the Latin word divertere. I'm probably missing that, from which we get our word divert. To divorce is legally to dissolve a marriage. Considering the Latin root, we could argue that to divorce is legally to divert a marriage or to remove a marriage from its original course. God's message through marriage. God designed marriage to illustrate Christ's love for the church. As individuals, we may fail and even walk away from fellowship with Christ, but he will never divorce the church, his bride. These are some really interesting words here. We use he uses the word never, and he uses the word ever. Very tough.
Yeah. Sometimes we can think that those are tough words to live by. In actuality, they are tough words to live by, because in this chapter, they dive into giving us a little statistics of divorce rate, not just in the secular world, but in the church world too. And it's about 50% both ways. So when you look at what God challenged us to do in marriage, right? He says, Christ's love for the church, and as individuals, we may fail, even walk away from fellowship with Christ, but he will never divorce the church, his bride. So if you think about it, like, yeah, a lot of us, we leave Christianity for a while and be like, man, I want to explore something else. Or, is this just my grandma religion? But God is always there to give us grace. So then when we think about that in terms of marriage, right? how many times we may hurt our spouse's feelings, do things that we should not do, um, just just a slew of things because we're imperfect people. So if God challenged us to be like, hey, if I put you guys together, like he said, he will never divorce the church. That means like we must think that we will never divorce our partner. So that's really heavy. That's really heavy.
Yeah, I'm sure it dives a little bit more in there because there are some exceptions. As a lawyer, we always want to.
Well, you may think that, and he does dive into it, but his preaching on it, and I'll bring it up to you. I highlighted it a little bit, but I think my husband
want to last resort.
My husband wants to get to that part, but I believe I highlighted it. Give us a second so I can bring it up.
Well, I know if I remember correctly, in the scriptures, I think Jesus said only in an act of marital unfaithfulness was divorce appropriate.
Okay, read this.
How do we define unfaithfulness?
On page 11, Dr. Macbeth kind of explain his teaching. Like, of course, we know that the Bible gives us a way out from marriage unfaithfulness, like basically stepping out on your partner and things of this nature. But he really speaks to his concept of it, because sometimes we think that that's going to be an automatic way out. And by no way I think that I or my husband is encouraging you to stay in something that God has released you from. But his thought process of it is very provoking to me. You want to go ahead and read it? It's on page 11.
Regrettably, many Christian leaders have compromised their teaching about divorce and remarriage precisely because this phenomenon are common in the church. I will tell you what many leaders hesitate to say. Other than sexual unfaithfulness, physical abuse, or desertion, I'm convinced there are no grounds for a Christian to divorce his or her spouse and marry someone else.
Finish. Even
when one or more of the above sins seems to have destroyed a marriage covenant, divorce should be considered the last resort.
And this is where it really hit home for me.
In our ministry, for instance, we found that God does not always release a person from marriage after his or her spouse has been unfaithful. Rather, the Lord may give the wounded spouse the love needed to forgive and seek reconciliation. Because every situation is unique, you should only proceed with divorce in such cases after praying earnestly and seeking pastoral counsel.
So even in those instances that he says in his book, sexual unfaithfulness, physical abuse, or desertion, he still thinks that, or he still preaches that God can still restore and give you grace, right? So even with that, even with the three things that he stated that's in the Bible, that, God can release you from a marriage or so-called give you grounds from a marriage, that's still not just, oh, my husband or my wife cheated, so let me leave. I think that he's encouraging us to always believe in God to restore, to give forgiveness, and to give grace to move on however he, chooses to do in those situations. But not just, I just don't want to stay on this book, but this is a good book for anybody who wants to, maximize your marriage, or if you're dealing with some tough issues, or just want to explore different thoughts about a godly marriage. This is a good book to get. So I wanted us to, come on here and just share some of our thoughts and not dive really deep, but just share some of our pitfalls or the reasons why, maybe using the word divorce, especially if you really don't foresee yourself getting ready to divorce your partner, what kind of effects that can have on your marriage. Do you want to go first or?
Sure.
Okay.
I think the word divorce, I think this principle applies not just to the word divorce, but really keeping a muzzle on our mouths and what we decide to speak. And divorce is kind of one of those words that's the sort of nuclear option, so to speak. And what I've learned over the course of my 5 years is that You can't sort of take those things back. And oftentimes the damage it causes is a lot more than you bargained for. You know, I was just telling my wife earlier, sometimes we try to, myself included, even this weekend with some of the things that I said. One being like, oh, I want to move out. And sometimes, you know, I think this was Joseph Prince who said this, a preacher. Like, sin begins with pride, right? This sense of you being able to control it. And sometimes we shouldn't often even put our spouse to the test by using those words or saying things that we don't really mean in our hearts, because we may think we're able to control it, and it will definitely end up spreading and being something more than we bargained for, almost like a fire, when you may say, I just wanted to light a small match, or to try to get them back, or to try to, you know, create leverage or level the playing field. And often it ends up spreading a lot more than we anticipated or had hoped. And then you have to pay the cost for it. I am, as I'm sure my wife is too, still paying the cost for stuff that we have said to each other in anger and out of frustration, and not pausing to be reflective about what we were going to say before we said it. So I know it's hard, but we should really try to be disciplined in removing that from our vocabulary. But I will also say too, we also have to have a certain level of fortitude and belief, and standing as a solid rock, that even when our spouse does say that word, we don't have to reciprocate and say it as well. So I don't want to also think that, and I this is going to be interesting to hear it from some older couples. I think you may have some times where you may hear that word. I don't think that that's completely uncommon.
Yeah.
So not to be completely shocked if it's said, but we should very much be aware of
the magnitude
and reducing, you know, the frequency of saying that word.
Or even I'll take it a little farther, because I believe that God has convicted me. I think when we first started out in marriage, and going back to, I think I said this in another video, I am a product of divorce. Both of my parents, they divorced and they remarried, and they're married now. So coming into this marriage, I didn't, foresee me getting a divorce. I wouldn't even say divorce was an option, but I think subconsciously it's like, okay, I'm a little hesitant in trusting someone completely, right? So I think the magnitude of the word being used was greatly affected to me, if that makes sense, especially coming from a divorced family, right? So I think if my spouse used it on me, it affected me maybe a little harsher than the average person who comes from a two-person home. And I remember briefly, the pastor who married us gave us a little advice. He even kind of pre-warned us, like, don't start your marriage with using the word divorce, because if you do, you'll go down this slippery road of it becoming common. And then you have to understand, life and death is in the power of the tongue. So every time you think that by you alluding to divorce, or you say the word divorce, you're giving the devil a foothold, right? My grandma used to say this: don't let the devil ride, because he'll end up driving, right? You'll start off maybe your first year of marriage, you might say it, you really don't mean it. You just upset and angry. And then you look back and it's becoming a weapon of war, where you really, I'm going to hit him this way, I'm going to say this, I'm going to leave, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And it starts to be so common. Then fast forward more years, you really start to think this could really be an option. So yeah, it should be like, hey, don't think it's uncommon. But I even challenge you, if you are newlyweds or just starting your marriage out or about to get married, work out a lot of those insecurities. train your voice, train your mind to be like, hey, this is an everlasting love. This is a godly love. We're going to keep those words out of our vocabulary because those are seeds that you are speaking over your marriage. And just as my husband was candid, I too have used those words in fear or to hurt my husband or for me to run, and I have paid the cost for that. And if you have two people who sometimes are afraid of the other person leaving them, how can you really gain security, hope, love, trust in your marriage? And then for us, I think the tough part is by playing around with those words, now it is more of a fight to build those walls of togetherness, if that makes sense, right? So yeah, I think the goal should be don't use it, because you don't want to have to build up trust, and then you use those words and that trust is torn down, and then now you have to build on that and then try to catch up, if that makes sense. I'm trying to challenge you to keep it out of your vocabulary, but don't give up hope. If you have used the word, if you guys have gone through fights or alluding to things, remember that God will always give you grace, right? And that's how we should do to our partners. Try to give them grace as well. But we have to recognize our wrongs, ask our partners for forgiveness, and really try our best to deviate from that word in other words to allude to separation, because we have to remember who we're fighting against. We're fighting against the enemy, the devil. The devil hates marriage. He hates marriage because it represents God. It was made from God. It represents God's love for the church. God don't love the devil. And the devil doesn't want anything that God represents to be in the forefront.
I think the God still loves the devil.
That'll be in another topic.
Does he hate the devil?
I don't know.
I think that's well said, though. I thought about, and I'll just say this very briefly. I thought about that analogy today as I was driving in the car. Thought about the Cold War, right? Where you have these two superpowers, and both are have the capacity to cause a nuclear strike on the other and to literally wipe out the other one. And there are all these, small obstacles or small things that are said that are both make, the other one on edge. And I think, as much as possible, you want to always be working towards edifying and speaking life. But I will say this again, and my wife and I guess we see it the same way. I as a young couple, I just always want to sort of pre-warn people that sometimes when they do face obstacles or challenges, that is what to be expected, so that people aren't just thrown off. And I will just say, guys, as men, you may have to swallow, I want a divorce, or I want to separate. It doesn't always feel good, but sometimes you may have to swallow it. And that's when you ask God to sometimes, well, all the time you ask him to handle it, and you ask him to take care of it. Because I think if I didn't have the fortitude, the same with my wife, if she didn't have the fortitude sometimes to stay even when she's heard those words, I don't know where we would be. And, we got to get rid of it. We got to take it out of our psyche. But we also got to stand strong and know that even when those storms happen, God is still able to keep us through.
Yeah, I agree. And the only thing that I would say is don't use God's grace as an excuse to hurt each other, right? I think that we should always be challenging ourselves to love our partner as much as we want to be loved, as much as God expects us to love each other, right? Always have a servant heart, and that can be difficult in itself because it's easy to think about self, right? I got married to Christian when I was 31. So I had 31 years of just thinking about Crystal. So it's easy and natural to say, hey, me. But that's not what God challenged us to do in marriage. God challenges us to see, empathize, love, care, and serve our spouse. You know, someone once said, marriage is the killer of self. So even in those moments where you feel hopeless or you feel like, man, he just don't get me, she just don't get me, you know, I just want out of this. That's when, you know, you really not just depend on each other, but you really have to be connected and to depend on God. I don't see how we could do this without God, right? And that would be my advice. Like, you know, try your best to eliminate the word divorce. If it comes, remember to repent. Repent to your spouse. Ask your spouse to forgive. And reinsurance is important. You know, as much as hurt we give or we do or we throw around and say, oh, it's nothing, make sure we double that with words of affirmation, you know, learning your partner's love language so you can do that over time if you have used those words. And we smile or we laugh with that, but that is jokingly. I think as one study said, for every negative word, you should do 5 positive words.
For my wife, I need to do 20 or 30 of them.
Yeah. But we didn't want to make this video so long. If you have a chance, you can go on Amazon, get the book. It's a really great book. And let's see, you want to close it out with something or?
Stay encouraged.
Stay encouraged, be encouraged, love each other, pray to the Lord. And until next time, the Plumbers.